We come to this place for magic. We come to AMC theaters to laugh, to cry, to care, because we need that, all of us. That indescribable feeling we get when the lights begin to dim and we go somewhere we've never been before. Not just entertained, but somehow reborn. Together. Dazzling images on a huge silver screen. Sound that I can feel. Somehow, heartbreak feels good in a place like this. Our heroes are the best part of us, and stories feel perfect and powerful. Because here they are. AMC Theaters. We make movies better. Gang, sorry about the bad Australian accent there, but fuck a duck, AMC. We're over it. It's been 2 years. No shade to Nicole Kidman, baby. You made that money. Good for you, honey. But AMC, enough is enough. Welcome to another episode of Try Not to Curse. This one is going to be interesting because I am here with a friend of a friend. So our pal Fiona introduced me to her friend Dan. Said, you know what? You guys have a lot of similar interests. Your personalities seem like, you know, you'd be friends. Let's connect. Let's chat. So I'm basically going to be interviewing Dan as if I don't know him because I really don't know him that well. We are Facebook friends. We've chatted on social media. We talk shit about movies. And we're definitely getting into all of that. But hi, thanks for being with us, Dan.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Now, you're in Connecticut right now. Are you from Connecticut? Were you born and raised here?
Yeah, I was born, I was born in Pakistan and then I moved to the US in '07. I lived in the UK in the middle. So it's a bit of a, like I traveled across like in chunks. So yeah.
Well, so what was your first impression of the UK, and then what was your impression coming to America?
Two very different environments, you know, like when I was in the UK, though, I was, you know, in elementary school. So what I remember, I'm sure is tinted by those experiences. Like, I'm sure like if I was there today, it's a different environment. You're going to work, like, whereas back then everything seemed, it's very cozy and small because I lived in a village town that was a couple of like towns away from like the center of Manchester. So I was like on Greater Manchester. So the good thing about I still follow Manchester United because, you know, I was literally 15 minutes away from Old Trafford when I was there. So that's certainly stuck. And then coming to the US, it's, you know, it seems like, you know, everywhere you want to go, A, you need a car, and then B, it's like it's more spread out, even though in the Northeast things are pretty tightly packed. But still, like you compare that to like Europe and the UK, like the roads are wider, the cars, now everybody drives an SUV. So like, you know, it's definitely a different environment. But of course, you know, when I got here, I was in middle school, so I had plenty of time to acclimate. And I don't know, I guess if things played out differently, I don't know where I would be, but I'm glad things played out the way they did.
And have you been back to Pakistan since?
So the last time I was there was in 2010. So it's been a long time. Like I have had opportunities to go. It's just for whatever reason, either I end up being like busy with work, or before it used to be busy with school, you know, when I was in college and stuff, and things just, you know, get in the way. And I suppose I can probably find some time eventually. And the goal has been in the last couple of years, like find time. Maybe this will be the year. So we'll see.
What would you describe your career as, right? Because you work a couple of different jobs, but they're all pretty much, you know, tech media based.
Yeah. I mean, so I work for, you know, different companies doing a lot of not the same stuff, but similar things. Like, you know, I started out roughly 8 or so years ago as a video editor. And then that kind of expanded into doing other things like being a producer, doing videography work, and started out doing a lot of freelance, ended up at ESPN for a while, left ESPN, did more freelance, did a couple of contract roles, like work for corporate company, you know, clients, I think like insurance companies and things of that nature, financial firms, like the ones that are kind of like based in and out right outside New York City. So between all of those, I think what has stuck in terms of like the one industry that I've kind of done a lot of work for with different companies is like sports broadcasting. So that's something that I've been doing on a pretty regular basis. Different clients from across the industry, like ESPN, I've been there twice. So as well as like NBC, I was with NBC Sports for the Tokyo 2020 games, and we were like a small team. Like we were doing something new for the digital, like basically creating NFL Red Zone, but for Team USA events around the Olympics. So we were doing whip around coverage, going from different events, because they're like the Olympics, they might have like 20 different events going on at the same time at like 7 different venues. So you're getting live feeds from all of them. It's like a huge media operation, but the goal for us was to like try to showcase Team USA wherever they're competing. And sometimes that might be in like multiple places. So we were kind of like running this 24/7 feed. And that was a good experience. I always like to point out, like, that was the out of all the things I could have imagined, that's the one that got me an Emmy. So I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. The whole team got that. And since then, I've just, done other work with educational companies like universities and stuff. So it's very, video producer is what I like to call myself, but I can touch a lot of different areas, whether it's graphics, live production, post-production. So I'm a jack of all trades, if you will, or that I like to think of.
Well, and again, this is when I've talked to you, and you tell me what you're doing for work and stuff. This is why I'm always like, oh my God, like you need to meet producer Mike, because you guys just have such similar backgrounds, such similar interests. He's obsessed with the Olympics. Also, as I've mentioned in the past, he's got Emmys, and it's just so funny to like hear you talk about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, yep, Mike's done that. Yep, that's pretty much what Mike's got going on. So that's really, really cool. Now, how did you get started in all of this? What was your interest in school, and what kind of courses did you take that led you to this path?
Yeah, well, I actually got interested in video as a thing, I suppose, like all the way back when I was in the UK, and I started kind of playing. And this is the weirdest thing, because nobody would imagine that's how you would get into it. But at the time, I was like obsessed. I got obsessed with Microsoft PowerPoint back in, I want to say 7th or 8th grade.
It's like one of the only programs I can use.
Yeah, and you'd imagine like, wait, so how does that connect to all of this? So I think like what it came down to was it was like a good storytelling tool, like presentations, and I wasn't really using it to like make presentations as in like you point the laser pointer at a corporate presentation, although I've done those since, but for work. But I was, like I started to kind of play with the tool set that was in there, and like I had fun with like using the custom slideshow settings to create like a trivia game within PowerPoint that you can like do a multiple choice, almost like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Like you click the whichever option you click, it will take you to a different slide. You go up the levels and stuff, and it was like a good storytelling tool. And then that slowly advanced to my curiosity to like, oh, Windows Movie Maker, I can actually like make videos, because there's certain things you can't do in PowerPoint. So like, voiceover and stuff, or it won't do it the way you want to do it in a video. And that sort of then swelled into video production. And when I got to the US, I went to 2 high schools. I went to East Haven High School for my 8th grade, and then 9th grade I ended up in Berlin, which is where I still am. And so in both schools, I kind of sought out like, hey, do you have a video production club or something, like a video club? And got involved in those things, like the radio station that the school had, and they had a TV studio. So like just getting involved in those things and just sticking it out, and then finding other avenues to stay engaged. And there were a couple of good things that happened, like where like I entered a few video contests and won a couple of things that helped my confidence. And then I was like, okay, well, now the time comes for me to decide where I want to go to college. And, I chose this as the field, and the rest, as they say, is history. So yeah, it's like a very interesting beginning, but like, eventually it just all panned out, I think.
Well, so where did you go to college?
I went to Quinnipiac. So Quinnipiac in Hamden, which is, I like to think they're one of the better institutions in the state for video. At the time, I had applied to UConn and UHeart, and I got accepted to all of them, but I thought their program was the best. UHeart was actually my second, I think, but the only reason I chose Quinnipiac over UHeart was because Quinnipiac gave me a better financial aid package.
I was going to say they probably have much better funding. UHeart does have a good communications program, but not to that level. And a friend of mine from high school went to Quinnipiac, and I ended up working for the MLB network for some time. He's down in the Carolinas now doing stuff, media-based stuff. So I totally get it. And that's really awesome. So what was one of your first jobs out of college?
So this was while I was still in school, because I kind of extended the last few years of my studies out. Like I basically needed a few courses and I spread them out over like 4 years where I could have just finished them up in like one semester. Yeah. But so I guess like you could say out of college, but I was still in college because I wasn't full-time anymore, but I was mostly done with my studies. But I was working at this like small marketing, integrated marketing company, they like to call themselves. So they do print, photography, video was something they were getting into a lot more, web design. So I came into Forbes Graphics, and they were based in, I believe, they're on the edge of Farmington and Plainville. So they're basically like, right about where ESPN is. And basically I was interning at the Bristol Chamber of Commerce / Central Connecticut Chambers of Commerce. So like, they put me onto that role. They said, hey, this company here, which is one of our members, they're looking for a video editor. We know that you love doing this stuff. And I was mostly doing email marketing for this internship. So they were like, we think that this might be a good way for you to do more of the video stuff that you are studying. So cool. They put me onto that. And then that's something that I think I ended up being with Forbes for like 5 years. And over that time, I did other freelance work too. I went to ESPN, did my time there the first time around. And the flexibility that they had at Forbes allowed me to A, learn a lot, and then be able to use that experience to build up the resume and get other opportunities. So it was a nice string of connections that worked out. So I'm glad that, and again, Quinnipiac, being where it all started. So
that's awesome. Now you also have a podcast. Tell my listeners what the podcast is called and where they can find you.
Yeah, it's Oh So Curious. So that's O with an apostrophe as in, 6 o'clock. Oh So Curious. And you can find it on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/Oh So Curious. Just search it on YouTube. We have a website called ohsocurious.com. I mean, we are on all the socials like Threads. We're on Threads, which is like, I think we're still on X, but we're on Threads as well. So you can find it everywhere. We cover like movies, like movie reviews, TV shows. It's a lot. And then there's some like other fun stuff. We have a late night show, Rolling Underground, but those guys are always up to no good, and they're down in Carolina. So, love what they come up with. And we have some, other stuff like we'll do like cooking videos. Like there was a $5 milk. You want to know how to make a $5 milkshake? We got a video that shows you how to do that. So it's just, just having fun, like, for the love of movies and enjoying and movies and talking about movies, basically. So
now, would you call it a video podcast? I don't know it's not a vlog. And then you have podcasts, but now there are these video podcasts that are cropping up everywhere. I feel like they need a separate name, but that I've not heard anyone describe it as anything other than a video podcast. So I just want to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, earlier today, I was talking to somebody and they referred to it as a wadcast, like with a V instead of a podcast, which is, I don't know what term is officially what it's meant to be called. But like, for example, yeah. And I started this out as like a video podcast that would also be an audio podcast. So because when we first started doing this, YouTube actually didn't have the podcasting function that they now have. Like you can actually label it as a podcast. But my goal was, let's do something that's maybe, each episode we go for about an hour, 2 hours, depending on what we're talking about. We'll have multiple topics. We used to have as many as like 4 or 5 people on there, but some, most of the time 2 or 3. And then we would take that and then we would do an audio version of that. So the goal was to, whatever we included in the podcast, you don't want it to be so visually inclined that somebody listening to it would not get any value out of it. So based on just good conversations, like, talking about movies, nerding out over like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, stuff like that. So it's then started to kind of evolve a little bit in the format. Like nowadays, we tend to cover a lot of DC and Marvel stuff too. And we talk about the movie of the week. Spotify added, it used to be called Anchor. Now it's like podcasters for Spotify for podcasters, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And they added like a video function. So like now you can actually just upload the video version of your podcast and it will, create the video version and the audio. So back then I used to like have to render out a separate version of audio. So it saves a step. So now on YouTube it's the same thing as on Spotify for podcasters. And then we usually like take the individual segments for the show, different topics, and put them up on as their own videos, because sometimes people are more interested in just listening to you talk about the Marvel story that week and not necessarily the movie. Especially like, like this time of year, like Ferrari's out and there's like a bunch of movies from December, but like not a ton new stuff coming out. So people tend to like be gravitating towards like certain topics. So we're always trying to like keep up with what draws interest, and then of course like what we are interested in. So yeah.
Well, so you said you've always been interested in, in video and in media, but was there any like TV show or like a movie that you saw growing up that kind of sparked that interest, and you thought like, oh, like how does this work, or how did they do that, and oh, that's something that I could get into?
Yeah, well, okay. So I grew up like watching a lot of Bollywood movies, and so like that's been a passion of mine, and I still have like a soft spot for those. It's, there's not every single one is a good, obviously, like, any Hollywood movie, any kind of movie, like, you'll probably have a few good ones and maybe a ton of bad ones. So you got to pick and choose your battles. But I love like a lot of the musicals that used to be, the Bollywood is all about their musicals. So back in the 90s and early 2000s, there's a lot of good bangers coming out. So like, I look back fondly at those. But like even back then, like when watching those movies, I would say like, I used to watch them more as just, with a curious mind. Like I wonder how some of these things are done. But then when I started to get into video production as like a thing, and I think like around that time, I was like watching the Dark Knight trilogy, and like, that was, I look back at like when I made the decision to go to Quinnipiac for, video production. I think like for me, Christopher Nolan and specifically at the time, the Dark Knight, I was like, that's my inspiration. Like I want to be able to tell those kind of stories and make those kind of movies. And to this day, like, of course, I would say he's probably my biggest single inspiration as like a filmmaker. Yeah. And beyond that, it's, just a lot of I'm like a big tech nerd. So like,
okay,
that kind of helps.
You guys can't see it, but there's like 6 monitors behind him and like a bunch others off camera. And I'm like, bro. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, every once in a while I'll take a picture of everything, especially because so it doesn't happen often that every single screen is on, but when it is, I'll like grab a quick snapshot and just like send it to somebody, and then they're like, "Oh, like you've got a lot going on, like that's insane." Or like when somebody actually walks into the space, they're always, the jaw drops the first time. So, sure. And I personally, sometimes I think about it, I'm like, yeah, if I walked into this space for the first time, I'd be like, "Holy cow, what is going on?" But it's to me, it's kind of like become background noise at this point because you deal with it every day. Yeah. But back when I was in college, I was like, working at Best Buy. I worked there for like 4 or 5 years. And so I became like a big tech nerd. And also I became like a big audiophile because I worked in the home theater section for some time. I worked in the computers department for the majority of my time. And so, like the best sound systems, the best TV quality, knowing like what formats they play, and all the color stuff like the Dolby Atmos and other things, the color pro, like HDR10, and like there's different versions of HDR out there, and how that kind of works on the filmmaker and like what they're producing. Because when you make a movie and you then distribute it theatrically, your deliverables are very different than when you're releasing it on like physical media versus throwing it on a streaming service. And so as a tech nerd, like, I was learning as much as I can about all that stuff. So I kind of draw my inspiration from a lot of those things. The one thing that I did like set myself as a goal that I have yet to realize is when I was in college, I was like, okay, so when I graduate, so this is like back in like 2014, 2015, and I was like halfway through my degree, and I was like, okay, so 2011 was when the Stargate franchise went off the air on television. The Stargate universe, I think, aired its last episode. And at that point, like MGM was in bankruptcy, and then like they came out of bankruptcy, but they had different priorities, went in different directions. And then even today, like MGM having been bought by Amazon, they might be developing something in the Stargate franchise, whether it's something of total reboot or a continuation, nothing really has happened in a while. I mean, they did like this one little made-for-TV movie a few years ago, which was decent, but like not exactly like what fans wanted. So I was like, that's one of those things I would want to do. Like that, if I have a goal, I want to be like involved in rejuvenating that franchise, and then seeing like that's in awesome. That time, Star Wars come back and Star Trek take off again over at Paramount. Like I'm like, it's right there. Like this could be like the third, big sci-fi franchise.
Well, so, I mean, with all that Paramount is doing with Trek and all the various Trek franchises and shows and productions, which it's amazing. My girl Abby and I are like obsessed. We love to see it. That's a really good possibility. I mean, everyone still wants Firefly to come back. So I mean, who knows? I feel like the sky's the limit these days, especially with all these various streaming services that are available to us. There's too much now. I say that all the time, but it's you know what? It makes people happy. It puts dollars in pockets. Whatever. Like, let's just keep going.
Yeah. No, that's like the film business is a business, right? Like it's ultimately that's all they're about is making money. Whatever franchise does that, that's what they're going to go after. I think ultimately though, there's always a risk involved in whatever you decide to do. Even I think like if you remember back when Star Trek Discovery was announced, I think they were having kind of some trouble with figuring out where to go with the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies. Yeah. And I think they launched what do they call it? CBS All Access. I think they launched it with Discovery as its like, flagship show.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think at the time I bought like the yearly, whatever the highest plan was. Like I was like, I'm committed to this. Like I bought that plan.
Oh, I bought it too. I loved it.
And I think like Discovery has had its ups and downs. I overall like the show. And I think what I really loved about it was like, I'm like, okay, so they basically took the Abrams movie aesthetic, kind of took a little more, well, first season was very Abram-esque, except slightly different. But the second season onwards, I think they really started to kind of like meld it with your classic Star Trek. And I really loved that, like having a brighter, like, more optimistic tone. And then also not being so dark. Like, well, the first season felt like it was a season at war. So I get it. But I really enjoyed, that show. And I think the point I was trying to make earlier was that was like a big risk for them. So I think launching the service at the dawn of this whole streaming era, it's worked out, but I think they've sort of been consolidating. Like, Paramount merged with, or CBS and Viacom merged back together, became Paramount Global. And now we have had like stories out there that they might be getting bought out by Warner Brothers Discovery. So Paramount Plus might not be like its own thing soon. Like maybe it might be Paramount Max or something.
I honestly hope not, because I think they're making really good decisions. I'm really happy with the service. I'm really happy with the shows that are available on there. Although I will say, and I know Abby's going to laugh when she hears this part, but when I was watching Discovery again, and I'm an old school Trek fan, like The Next Generation is absolutely my favorite series of all time. I've seen all the films.
That's my ringtone. That's yeah.
I love it more than Star Wars. People think that because I'm into like nerdy shit and fandom stuff that like I've got to be obsessed with Star Wars. No, fuck Star Wars. Like Star Trek is for me. It's Star Trek and Marvel for me. So spoiler alert, guy, for those of you who haven't seen the show, Discovery has a younger Spock in it, and the main character is his sister. And you're watching it and you're like, never heard of Spock having a sister before. He's always been an only child. Then something happens in the show and they're like, yeah, so he's just going to be sworn to secrecy that his sister never existed, and Spock will never mention that he had a sister, and we're going to act like this person was. And then I'm like, oh, how fucking convenient. Like, you know what I mean? Like I heard that and I was like, okay, like I don't know, but
I will defend that a little bit by saying,
listen, it is a good show. It is a good show.
Well, I mean, I think logically they tightened that knot as best as they possibly could, all things considered, because like it was so preposterous to kind of like bring that up, and because like we never got a flashback with the sister, like
right.
I suppose maybe if of all the people in the original series, if there was one person who was probably going to stick by something like that and not reveal it to the world, or even on his deathbed, like, Spock, like, I have a sister, goodbye. And like, and Rather Khan, but like no, like even I think that would be like probably Spock would be the one person to do that. So I think it added up well, but like also I've noticed that the later season, that the later, not just even the next, the Discovery, but also even Strange New Worlds, as well as Picard, they've sort of been retconning things as they go along, like where they don't seem to fit with what they're doing now versus what was done before. And I think like I personally take those on a case by case basis as far as what I think about them. Yeah, because in some instances I'm like, does it really matter? Like you watch something from 20, 30 years ago versus today, it's like made for a different audience. And you also got to think about it from a standpoint of like, you can't always cater to the same audience that was getting you all your viewership numbers and your merchandise sales 30 years ago, because they're 30 years older now. So you got to like, a franchise will, it's kind of like, I think, that has happened to multiple other franchises in the past. Like I think there's like the Terminator, for example. They ran out of creative juice, but they were also sort of like stuck with the same stuff. They're like, you're trying to do the same thing you were doing like 30 years ago. You got to move on. And so, I'm like, I'm kind of in the middle on those, but I definitely have, like, I've watched a podcast where like, I don't know, have you ever seen anything with Robert Meyer Burnett and like the John Campea show? If you haven't,
no,
like,
I haven't. No.
He's like a huge Star Trek fan, but like he's one of those people who hates all the new stuff and loves the old stuff. But like he loved the last season of Picard because of like the whole bringing back the whole TNG cast. But I tend to land in the middle on those. I'm like, I love Trek, but I'm not like somebody who's gonna plant the flag and be like, if they change anything about Voyager, I'm just gonna like just pretend that this thing doesn't exist.
Well, I'm also I'm of the mindset where like I love a franchise that makes fun of itself. So like Upper Decks is great because they they bring up that kind of thing, but then there's also a lot of tongue in cheek with that. No, I love all of it, and I anything that I think brings new fans and some new interest is a good thing. So I don't really begrudge any of it, but just like I said, I just thought I'd bring up the Discovery thing because I was sitting there for like, what was it? The second season. And I'm like, how are they gonna, because this is not, and then it was like, oh, okay. Conveniently. She's
like 900 years in the future. So like, what are you going to do?
Right. Exactly. But you mentioned Bollywood films, and I want to point out, because we've talked about this before as well, AMC theaters, the at least I should say the one near me, has a Hindi film, a new film every week. And I, not knowing much about Bollywood, not knowing much about Hindi films and just the various cultures, I just always kind of put the two together because a lot of the Hindi films have Bollywood aspects in them where they do like break out into song and dance, and then they also will do like a dance number at the end of the film during the credits. But what is the difference between a Hindi film and a true Bollywood film?
So actually, right there, I would say that there is a slight correction that I would make with that is, so I think there's, I want to say there's like 5 or 6. I may be wrong with this number because I think there's more, but there's like a good 5 or 6 different film industries within India. Like, so you have obviously what they call Bollywood, which is mostly based out of the Mumbai area, and they make movies in the Hindi language. So the differentiation generally comes from it being in the different languages, the most popular languages of India. So Hindi being the like the national language, but also like the one that is spoken a lot in the northern parts of India and the northwestern parts, like that's where kind of Mumbai is. So Bollywood is Hindi films. Then you have the next big one, I think, is Telugu, and that's what you refer to as Tollywood. Yep. So I'm sure you remember RRR. I forget what the R stand for. Like this stand for one
nominated. Thing. Well, it was like Roar, Rise, maybe Rebel was one of them.
I think it was Rise, Rebel, Roar, or something
like that. Yeah,
it was maybe not in that order, but like it was.
Yeah, gang, it's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. Also, a really fun fact: pretty much any Hindi film that they have at AMC in the theaters is actually already on Netflix. Netflix is amazing for international shows and films. But if you're an action buff like I am, check out those movies. You're never going to see anything as awesome as a Bollywood, Tollywood, Hindi action film. I'll tell you what.
It's the other thing about those movies is they tend to like, they don't care about the rules. Like, here's the thing, like one thing that you will notice with like a lot of Hollywood movies, especially studio films, right? Like studio films all tend to follow a certain template or like way of doing things because there's institutional knowledge that has been instilled over decades and decades of experience. And that comes all the way down from like the people who are working in the unions, the Teamsters, all the way up to like the above the line people like directors and writers who have a certain way that they were taught to do things and certain way that in which the studios encourage things to be done. So you end up, that's why I think we get a lot of nowadays people are seeing a lot of these movies that kind of look and play the same, whether it's the CGI, the approach to how much CGI they have, or how the story is structured in terms of the 3-act structure that's very traditional to Hollywood movie making. Whereas if you look at like the Indian cinema as a whole, and whether that's Bollywood or Tollywood or Kollywood, like there's like Malayalam, which is I think like northeastern. Then if you go like really south is Kollywood, which is like Tamil movies, and then like there's Gujarati film, which is like more towards Punjab, like that's closer to like where Pakistan is, and then there's Punjabi film industry as well, and then Bhojpuri, which is up there. So there's like 5 or 6 different ones, or like Canada is a big one, not Canada as in Canada above the US. Canada with a K, K-A-N-N-A-D-A, Canada, or like they call that Sandalwood, which is really I honestly think that's one of the coolest names. Or like Mollywood, which is what the Malayalam one is. Although like I'm sure people would think of different things when I say Mollywood. But so the point being like, they don't really follow those traditional rules. Even Bollywood movies, like sometimes you watch a movie, you're like, wait, because like we are not conditioned. If you watch a lot of like Hollywood movies, and that's generally your frame of reference for how a movie plays out, then you are naturally kind of inclined to watch a movie and consume it with a 3-act structure, a good beginning, middle, and end, a certain like rising action, climax, falling action, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Whereas in some of these movies, like things kind of play out in a way that's completely does not line up with those 3 acts. And then not to mention, a lot of these movies are like much, much longer in runtimes. Like, okay, so every once in a while you go watch an Avengers movie that's 3 hours long. Like, sure. Right. But like a lot of
standard.
Yeah, like a lot of people didn't see Killers of the Flower Moon because it was like 3.5 hours long.
Which, by the way, like, gang, it's so good. You need to see it. Just even like just to educate your damn self, honestly, because it is a part of American history. But no, yeah, like Triple R is 3 hours long. I love them personally. I think, and again, like we're talking. You don't realize that it's 3 hours. It's not. I have yet to see any of those films that drag at any point in any parts. But I will also say, like, if you're really not sure where to start, my favorite actors are AJ Devon, Akshay Kumar, and obviously the GOAT Shah Rukh Khan, who, again, for those of you who don't know, his first film, the romantic film that he did, his romance. Has been playing in a theater somewhere in India every single day for the past, I want to say at least 35 years, which is amazing.
That movie. So I actually, I think you're talking about, that was in his first film, although his first film was kind of like a romance film.
Because that's kind of how he started out, was like a romantic lead.
Yeah, and he did actually early in his career, he did a lot of like romance, but then he like for a good period of time before they made DDLJ, which is what you're referring to, the Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, that movie, before they made that film, there was a good period of time in his career where he started out as like doing a lot of romantic movies, but then he kind of veered into doing action films, and not a lot of them were like
a lot of action lately too.
Yeah, and like back then, like a lot of those were like not really like big hits, but like he was just like, signing, like he was a young actor, like just, all right, sign on this movie, do that one, and you just keep working your way and you find it. But then basically the son of probably one of the most recognized and beloved filmmakers in the history of Bollywood, like made this movie, and DDLJ became like the biggest hit of the year, of the decade. And then since then, you're right. And there's a theater in Mumbai where they've been playing it literally every day every weekend for the movie came out, I think in like October 95 or 96. It's basically as old as me. And it's been it's been playing in that theater for almost 30 years, which I think is like a record for any movie playing anywhere for that long. And
they refer to him as the Tom Cruise of India, which I don't think is fair at all. I think he's much bigger than Tom Cruise. Yeah, for sure. And his catalog is larger. But again, anyone who wants to educate themselves and find out more about this, Netflix has David Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. He has a wonderful interview with Shah Rukh Khan, where you actually like kind of get a little behind the scenes of his history in the movies and life for him now as one of the biggest stars in India. It's really cool. I'm super obsessed. But again, Netflix has a lot of really great titles. Like I said, if you do a search for Akshay Kumar, literally anything he's in, guys, so good. Top notch. Mission Mars is great. I can go on, but let's change gears just for a little bit. So are you a DC person or a Marvel person?
I don't know if you can see
that says DCU Daily
off my left shoulder.
Yeah.
So that's like, this is part of my, by the way, this shameless plug is part of my YouTube channel. We do a series called DCU Daily. Okay. And that basically, it's basically what it is. It's we're talking all things DC daily, or we're working our way up to daily because it's like, that's a lot of work to do it daily, but like, we're going to get there. Having said that, while I definitely would say my preference, if you made me pick one, I would pick DC.
Yeah, you
I equally support and appreciate both because, like, for example, I would go try to see as many of the Marvel movies on opening weekend as possible. In fact, I would, if I'm being perfectly honest, and part of that has to do with the fact there's been more of them over the last 10 or so years, I've seen probably more Marvel movies in the theater than DC movies. But like if I were to make a list of my top 5, it's a healthy balance. So I kind of lean DC, but like I'm still like, big Marvel fan too.
And is there any film that you have seen multiple times in theaters?
Multiple times. Okay, so just this past year, 2023, I went and I saw Barbie 4 times in a movie theater.
Oh my God. I've seen it twice and I figured that was enough, but damn, that's impressive. Okay. Yeah. Was it just because like you were just taking friends and you're like, oh yeah, you need to see this. I'll go, whatever.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, because the first time I went and saw it was like an early screening. So like they did an early fan screening on a Wednesday and it was like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Right. So I show up. That was the first time I saw it by myself because like nobody else was available. And I totally get it. 3 p.m. on a Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it was. I mean, nonetheless, everybody else, like there were families and everybody. I mean, it was summertime, so I get it. Yeah. And I was so underdressed because I was wearing like a white and whatever other color, and everybody was wearing pink. Yeah. But I saw it. That was an early screening for the podcast, and so after that, though, every time I went with like somebody different, friends and family to go watch it. And I saw it in like an IMAX screen. I saw it in Dolby. I saw it in like a normal digital thing. Like I saw it in all different. I saw it at an AMC. I saw it at Cinemark. So it wasn't just like I was going to the same theater. It was like it was a different experience each time. So
what is your preference of movie theaters? Because like I said, I have an AMC near me, which is what I go to, but I do also have like a little local mom and pop theater right 5 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
What do you have near you?
I have an AMC near me where they have like the Dolby at AMC, which is like their special format.
Yeah,
because
we have a Dolby.
There's different versions of that too. Because like if you go to the one in Trumbull, there's like a Prime and there's like a Laser Prime, but like the one that I have is just Dolby at AMC, so it's significantly better than a normal digital theater, but it's not as big of a screen as like the IMAX. But they do have an IMAX. If I could go see IMAX as well, but the IMAX seating, like I don't like that. Like especially I went and saw Oppenheimer in IMAX. Oh my God! Like
I did too. Yeah.
You want to go see? I mean, you're sitting in like these auditorium seats watching a 3.5-hour movie. I'm like, I would love to just be able to recline back a little bit and relax.
Yeah.
But and then there's a Cinemark that I go to, which I mentioned, like I went to Barbie. They have the Screen X, I think, is one of their formats. And so they have like that's a large screen format. And then I think there's another version where the screen extends off to the sides. I haven't really tried that yet. Yeah. Maybe that's Screen X. I don't know. Like they have different premium formats. And I think I saw Barbie in 3D once, one of those.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask, how do you feel about 3D films? Because I honestly, I try to avoid them because I don't get a whole lot out of them. There's certain films. So they re-released Jurassic Park in 3D for like one of the anniversaries, like the 30th anniversary or something. That was incredible. But that's because Steven Spielberg's really good about like layers and depth and having, you know, different angles and different levels. Yeah. So that was a sight to behold in 3D. John Carter, who nobody saw, is amazing in 3D. I just saw the second Aquaman, which you and I are going to get into for sure. Didn't see it in 3D, but a friend of mine had a student who said he saw it in 3D and thought it was incredible. So when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see this would work really well in 3D. This would be amazing in 3D. So now I almost want to see it, but I don't care for the film, so I won't see it again. But we'll get into all of that. So I was just wondering what your thoughts, because I really do try to avoid 3D movies as much as humanly possible. And I prefer a Dolby or an IMAX if I want an enhanced, viewing.
Yeah. My usual goal is to go see something in the best format possible the first time around. And then, or like at least the one of those times. Now, generally speaking, I don't end up seeing a lot of movies more than once. So I try to get the Dolby one because, the other thing is a lot of these theaters, they literally run their normal digital screens at like half the brightness to save the amount of hours the projector can run for. And before
those bulbs are fucking expensive too. Those are ridiculous.
Which I totally understand like the reason why, but like as far as an experience goes, like for example, I went and saw the latest Fantastic Beasts movie. I think it was either last year or the year before. Yeah. And there were these scenes at night where you could barely tell what was going on because of how dull the screen was. And that's a shame. I mean, the other thing was like the screen, the projector stopped working halfway through, so they turned the lights on, completely destroyed the experience. Then like 15 minutes later, the movie starts back up.
Thankfully, I can't say that I necessarily have that issue at my theater. Although I will say, like Batman versus Superman, there was definitely scenes in there where I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like I couldn't, until there was like a flash of light, you couldn't tell what the hell was happening. It was so dark.
And you know what the thing is? Like those movies look way better at home. Like when you put them on a Blu-ray.
Well, and you would think like you guys specifically made this for this purpose. Like, why wouldn't you just make it better quality so that it could withstand and be done properly? But that's neither here nor there. We don't work for the theater. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, another thing that I tell people all the time, because people always try to say to me like, oh, you're a movie critic. And I'm like, the fuck I am. I don't know shit about the world of cinema or directing or anything of that nature. I call myself a reviewer at the highest level. But that's really also only because I see more movies than anybody else. Like I saw 2 yesterday. I'm seeing 1 tonight. I'm probably seeing 1 tomorrow. And so that's just how all of my weeks go. I saw 5 last week.
That's a lot of movies
in a day, baby. That's what I do. Well, so a friend of mine, I went and saw the Beyonce concert in Dolby. I saw Taylor Swift concert in Dolby as well, but I saw the Beyonce concert in Dolby, was texting a friend of mine who, Jerry, everyone knows Jerry, who we tried to actually see her in Brooklyn and it just didn't happen to work out for us logistically. So I'm texting him like, oh my God, the concert, I can't wait for you to see it. The outfits, da-da-da. He's like, I have a ticket for tomorrow, but you know what? You've inspired me. I'm going to go right now. I've got time. And I said, let me drop my friend off. I'm turning around. I'm coming. I'm going to see it with you. So I saw the Beyonce concert 2 times in a row in the same day. And he looked at me halfway through the film and he's like, I can't believe you literally just fucking watched this. And I was like, this is what I do. Like, this is like, people talk about hobbies. That's my hobby is seeing films and stuff. Yeah. So I'm saying all of that to say, when people come at me about like, oh, that movie was shit and that movie was, I say 2 things. Was the movie crap, or was it A, bad writing, or B, bad editing? Because I rarely, if ever, blame actors, because the actors can only work with what they're given. So if the script is garbage, and if the production company edits it to death, which was in the case in the latest Fantastic Four film, the Miles Teller version, that thing was edited like absolute trash. Suicide Squad, everybody gave Jared Leto's Joker shit, but then the director came out and was like, oh, I have so much footage of Joker that it could get its own movie. Well, motherfucker, why didn't you put any of that in the film? Because everybody's trashing poor Jared Leto, who is a method actor.
Well, they removed him from, they took the movie away from the director and they gave it to like the trailer house to edit the file, which is like crazy how all that played out anyway.
Well, and another example, and again, talking about DC films in general, is Joss Whedon's Justice League versus Zack Snyder's. Two completely different fucking films. Granted, I don't agree that it should be 4 goddamn hours long, Zack Snyder, but that I liked that film much more than Joss Whedon's, and I'm a Buffy fan. I'm not a fan of Joss anymore, but I'm a huge Buffy fan. So like for me, it was really strange to sit there and be like, okay, just DC being DC. And then I saw Zack Snyder's version. I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Pardon my French, but so I just wanted to kind of get into the weeds with you on that. And as we go into talking about Aquaman, because it's not that I don't care for DC. I love all the Batman films, all of them. Michael Keaton is still the greatest Batman of all time, in my opinion. However, the most recent, the Batman with Robert Pattinson, I adore that film. I loved that film. That film for me was beautiful. It was really thoughtfully put together, in my opinion. But I had a friend who's a big movie fan, and he was like, what a fucking depressing film. This was good. And I'm like, yeah, the guy's parents were murdered and he spent his whole life trying to avenge them. Like, that is the tone of Batman. Like, if anything, they got that part right. So, but I don't, so what is your opinion of everything that I've just spewed upon you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll kind of go back a little bit and just quickly mention, as far as 3D goes, I think I love your take on 3D, because I think when it's done well, it's done with the intention that when it's shot, the movie is shot for 3D. Now, granted, Jurassic Park was not shot for 3D, but I think just the cinematography style of that film lent itself to 3D conversion. Whereas I think the last 3D movie I saw was, well, it was Barbie, and then also Avatar, the Way of Water, and that movie never felt like I was watching a 3D movie. And because like there's a lot of people, like in my mind, a 3D movie is like where you see stuff that feels out of place coming at you in this 3D dimension.
And that's exactly it. I know exactly what you're talking about. And also, people, when you go to see a 3D film, where you sit also really does affect that, which a lot of people don't realize. You need to sit in the dead center of the screen. But that is you hit the nail right on the head. That is always my problem, especially when they're like, oh, this was specifically shot for 3D. And then I'm in there and I'm like, okay, I didn't see anything happen. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's seamless. And the way they shoot it is, if you have seen the behind the scenes, they've got like this 2-camera rig where there's literally bouncing the light on a reflector between the 2 cameras, and that's how they're recording it physically with 2 cameras. And then in post-production, there's a whole different workflow for that, versus movies that are converted to 3D in post-production, or like older movies. I went to see the Titanic recent like anniversary re-release. I forget which anniversary. I think it must have been like the 25th or maybe the 30th. It seems like.
I think it was the 30th, which is
you might be
depressing.
But like, I think like even that movie, well, a lot of these like James Cameron films and Steven Spielberg and even Christopher Nolan, like these filmmakers, and they're not the only 3, but like they're really good at making films for the big screen and treating it like a movie that is meant to be watched on the big screen. Like, for example, and now you can't do it with every movie. Like you want to go watch a rom-com like Sleepless in Seattle, there's only like you can film it as cinematically as you want, but like you're not gonna get, because you don't derive the same, like you don't need this big dolly shot of the whole cityscape and somebody walking or some crazy action shot, because that's not what the rom-com requires.
Right.
So that kind of a movie, you can only derive so much of big screen value. Whereas I think movies that these like Spielberg, even the way he shot West Side Story, the new one, and James Cameron, of course, everything that he's done,
Scorsese,
and Christopher Nolan, like they're made for the big screen. So like when the way they're shot, I think lends itself to 3D. Whereas I think then there's like the 3D conversions where literally they're just got like, okay, so we're gonna have stuff throwing and coming at the screen, like that Jason Statham Meg 2 that came out, which was. It was so bad it was good kind of a movie, and I 100%. Totally had so much fun with it. I saw it twice, 100%. But like that, you could tell I didn't see it in 3D either time, but you could tell that movie was like done so that you could easily convert it to 3D, and it definitely was a 3D version out there. And that movie was one of those like where stuff was like coming at the camera a lot, and just like it's, so at that point I'm like, that kind of 3D works as like a roller coaster ride. Like you want to go to an aquarium, or you want to go to a theme park, and then you want to go into a theater that's at the theme park where you put on these 3D glasses, or it's 4D and your seats moving around like Mr. Bean's you know, when he goes and he's chucking people out of their seats. I think like that kind of like, you know, what Martin Scorsese would call a theme park ride. I mean, I think that's where that 3D belongs. But like when it comes down to 3D, the way it should be done for cinema, and the reason why I think 3D has died is because a lot of people kind of went with that former version, whereas the latter is like what James Cameron does, which is really
from a theater standpoint. Yeah, from a theater standpoint too, it's a lot to maintain that equipment. And they, like, you know, it's not like every film comes out in a 3D format. So for a lot of theaters, it's not worth it, especially the smaller mom and pops theaters, just to maintain and keep that equipment around. The cost just doesn't do it for them, which I totally get. I'm actually going to see Godzilla -1 tonight. I was like, yeah, okay, whatever, just Godzilla. But somebody was like, nope, everybody's saying it's incredible. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. But let's talk about Aquaman too.
Yeah.
So listen, you know what the first one, I hated the first one. And for me, it's the writing. The writing is cheesy and corny. DC has they have a hard time with tone. Marvel is always kind of even keel. There's action, there's personal, you know, character building, there is interpersonal stories, there is backstory that fans know, there are Easter eggs, they give you a full range of emotion, but it's always consistent. My problem with DC is one DC film is not like another DC film, and then they try to merge the franchises together, and they always miss the mark because they just can't get the tone right. So for Aquaman, this is 100% made for little kids. They want little kids to be there, but yet, especially in Aquaman 2, they tried to break a record for how many times you could say shit in a fucking cartoon, in a comic movie. I don't know what that was about. They said it like 10 times, and that's coming from me, gang. So it was really strange because it's like the writing is juvenile and definitely for younger audiences, but yet people are still being murdered, people are still cursing, there are still kind of scary demonic kind of characters. So I sit there and I'm like, you guys can't figure out who you are as a franchise, as a film, you know what I mean? So it's like they're having a crisis, identity crisis for sure. And like Robert Pattinson's Batman could never be in the same film with Jason Momoa's Aquaman. You know what I mean? So that's always where my issues have been with DC. Now, you said Aquaman 2 is fun. It is fun. It is fun. I liked it better than the first Aquaman. I definitely left the first Aquaman being like, fuck this, fuck DC. But the second one is better, I will say. But I'll let you go ahead and state your case.
Well, I mean, look, I think if you want to see the one example of what like made the second Aquaman so much fun to watch was like when they're trying to escape the prison in the desert all the way to the forest into the ocean. And is it Patrick Wilson? Not am I thinking? Is Patrick Wilson the one playing
the brother?
Orm, right.
Orm.
I miss his name. I sometimes say, is he Jason Patrick or Patrick Wilson? Jason Patrick, completely different. No, he was an Oppenheimer.
Jason Patrick, completely different.
Yeah, completely different. But like Patrick Wilson, I'm like, he's running with his like arms behind him and like this. And that was like the first shot that I saw him doing that. I was like, wait a second, what's going on? And then like quickly, I'm like, okay, well, hold on. Like, and 2 shots later, they're like, what are you running like that? It's like, that's not how you're supposed to run. Oh, and like this. And then all of a sudden he's running twice as fast as Aquaman. I'm like, that was like, if you want to say like what kind of movie Aquaman 2 is, that is the kind of movie Aquaman 2 is. Like that's that kind of humor that you would find in Batman.
I've never had to run before. Yeah.
Or like the moment, the other thing that kind of epitomized the film was in the beginning where they have this whole monologue where Jason Momoa is like, well, I can basically say it was Jason Momoa as Aquaman because he basically played himself in the whole movie. But the epitome of that was like in the beginning of the film where he's got his motorcycle and he's doing like these dirt devils and like they stay on those shots for like a whole minute. And I'm like, okay, all right, you got a 2-1 shot. All right, so you got the reaction shot of the father with the baby. Oh, look what he's doing. Okay, another shot. All right, now let's move on. No, there's another shot. And then there's like, you get 5 shots of him doing that and then they move on. I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, it's just, and then to the point where I did not buy him as an Arthur Currier character for the first 5-10 minutes of the film until we get into the whole underwater plot, because he was literally just playing himself, and I was just
genuinely. Like, they were like, you don't even like. He would show up every day, and they'd be like, "Oh, you don't even have to change. Great, just get right in." Like it was his clothes, all of his jewelry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
like which like Amber Heard apparently said like, "Oh, he dressed like Johnny," and that was like, I'm like, dude, that's he dresses like that anyway.
How he dresses. Yeah, we're not gonna get into it
anyway.
Although she was in the movie way more than anybody had believed she was going to be. Like everybody's talking about, oh, they edited her all out. She was in the movie. She was in it.
And quite frankly, it wasn't like, I think when I look at it, I'm like, this movie was basically the first Aquaman movie, except it wasn't Aquaman and Mera going on an adventure. It was Aquaman and Orm going on an adventure. So therefore, and she was in the big fight sequence in the beginning. She was a big part of the third act. I'm like, she was just missing during the second act, which is fine. Like there's a story reason why they did that. So I get it. But ultimately I had fun with it. I'm like, even the first one, I actually really enjoyed the first one because it was such a change of pace from some of the other stuff that was because it came on the heels of like the Justice League movie, which was so the first Justice League movie I watched twice in theaters because the first time I missed the opening sequence with Batman on the roof.
It's so
I was like, what did I miss? Did I miss something? Because I missed the whole missing mustache phone footage sequence, and that was like the only thing people were talking about. I'm like, wait, that was in the movie? I didn't see it in the movie, so I went and saw it from the very beginning. So that's why I saw it twice. But there was like, it left a bad taste in your mouth because you could clearly tell that movie was like ripped apart and put back together again. And after the fact, we found out, like, as much as I don't like Joss Whedon for all that has come out about him in the time since, I don't envy him as a filmmaker for being given the task that he was, that they told him, you've got like less than 3 months to take this $250 million tent pole and completely redo like 70% of it and do the different color palette for everything that you're keeping from the pre-shoots.
That's fair.
And, here's $70 million. I mean, so like he was kind of like, no matter who you put in that position, they would have kind of been set up to fail.
Yeah.
And having said that, though, Aquaman coming out. Now, here's the thing. That Aquaman movie does not line up at all with the aesthetics of Aquaman in the Justice League that Zack Snyder was making. Not to mention Batman v Superman, like the costumes and everything. So you had to kind of buy into the version of Aquaman they were presenting in 2018 as its own thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I started off. And then after that, I was just like, this was a good continuation. I liked it. I thought that I really loved James Wan's cinematography style. The camera's always active, dynamic, moving around. And I think that's where the 3D aspect of it comes into. It's going to do well in 3D because of the way it's shot. And it felt like a big grand adventure, the kind of thing. I think I was like, this movie, after watching it, I want James Wan to direct an Indiana Jones movie because I bet he would have had a better sense of adventure and fun than the Indiana Jones we got last year, which was made by a fantastic filmmaker, but I just don't think maybe he was the best fit for that job in hindsight. I mean, James Wan also has Fast and Furious under his belt, and he has one of the better Fast and Furious movies under his belt. So I think he should be, if Disney has any appetite to do an Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford in the future, James Wan is the one they should, pick up to hire to direct that movie.
Like I appreciate that they want to keep these franchises going, but at the same time, like, how about just start coming up with more original shit and more original stories, or giving stories that are out there and like put them in the mainstream. There are so many wonderful stories out there and so many authors and writers that are just not getting their shot because we're just recycling the same fucking shit. And it's like I just saw Poor Things, which is based on a book. So incredibly creative and original. And just delightful to watch as a film all around. But Star Wars has the same problem that DC has. Like, so when JJ directed, he tried to give notes to Ryan afterward and said, hey, this was the direction I was trying to take the films. And Ryan said, fuck you. I've got my own ideas of what I want to do. So nothing is cohesive right now with that franchise as well. So it happens because, people don't want to be told how to do their jobs. I get it. But at the same time, like, it's not about you, bro. So yeah, but who are your favorite directors?
Well, I think going off of what I mentioned maybe earlier, I think Christopher Nolan's probably at the top of the list. Not probably, he is at the top of the list. I would probably put why am I forgetting his name? He directed Indiana Jones just now, and he directed Logan. I'm actually just gonna find his name. James Mangold.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, James Mangold, I think, is up there in my list because, look, Logan is probably one of the top 3 superhero movies ever, all time. The Dark Knight, Logan, and the third in my list usually varies. But between those 2 guys, I think they're 2 of the best filmmakers out there. Denis Villeneuve right now is at the top of his game, going back all the way to Blade Runner. And even before that, what was the one?
Oh, my God.
Like the one with Bruce Willis, and I'm forgetting it was a doppelganger. I'm forgetting the name of that film, but or I might be miscrediting him. But like Denis Villeneuve's sense of sci-fi with Dune is great. I didn't love the first Dune because it felt like an incomplete narrative because it was
right.
And so I'm hoping the second one. Because like everything else was great. I just felt like the movie ended before it should have ended.
I had to explain that to so many people who were like, I didn't care for it. I was like, you understand there are a million books. And they were like, oh, like, so it's not just the one. I was like, no, like this could go on for another 20 years. Like,
so who's the writer of the why am I forgetting? I'm blanking on the name of the author of the book, but like he wrote 3 books, I think, right? And then his son continued on the whole series with like way more after that. So I don't know how much of that. They were still working on a HBO series that's kind of like a way back in the day prequel with the Sisterhood. And I don't know if that's still, because that got like revamped some time ago, but just like with the Batman side, they're making the Penguin show, and they're also working on like a GCPD show, and then an Arkham show, which is part of the new DCU, but still Matt Reeves is the one working. I'm like, they've got a lot of these like connect tie-ins. So Dune has got like one show that they were developing, and it was gonna be like way back in the time, like 1,000 years or something. But I'd be interested in that because you get a little more of the backstory. I love Foundation, by the way. I just want to bring this up. Like, did you watch Foundation on Apple TV Plus? Because
it's on my list. I've not gotten to it yet.
It's as far as like sci-fi TV shows go, like it's one of the best looking and well put together shows. And trust me, I don't know if you're a fan of Lee Pace or not, but after watching this show, you're going to be a fan of Lee Pace.
Okay. I got into The Expanse. I love The Expanse. You want to talk about groundbreaking sci-fi. Doc, it's wild.
As far as like accuracy, right? Like you watch the stuff in that show, the way they do it, and you look at the behind the scenes, like Naren Shankar, one of the exec producers, as well as like the authors of the books. I'm like, they put the time and effort into making. I'm like, if they can do it, then why can't? I get it. Like what they did was actually very VFX heavy. It's like and then also production design.
I don't care though. It was great. It was beautiful.
So I understand like some shows choose to forego that because they're like, A, it's not going to affect the story as much, or B, people are not going to care about it as much, and C, is going to save us money. So, or like we explain it away, like, oh, we got inertial dampeners. Like, that's the big Star Trek, Stargate, or Star Wars way of explaining it away. Whereas with they were like, this dude literally had a stroke because after years of being in, I don't know, how far are you, have you watched the whole thing?
Oh no, I'm all caught up. It's all
okay. So you know what I'm talking about when I say this guy had just like randomly, and was it, I don't even know if it was a finale or not. It was just like randomly, which is how it would happen in real life. Like you're in space all the time, and then these extreme G forces, he just randomly has a stroke and dies. And it was the most anticlimactic ending to an episode, but it was also the most realistic way in which somebody like could pass away.
Well, and also unfortunately, because I didn't read the books, but a friend of mine did and had been telling me all about them as I was watching the series. Unfortunately, that character wasn't supposed to be killed off, but that actor did some inappropriate shit and had to get fired. So, again, people want to blame the writing, the franchises, the direction, the production. And it's like, sometimes the actors fuck themselves over. So it is what it is. True. And he was my favorite character too. I was devastated. And then my friend explained that to me and I was like, oh, all right, bye. Like, see you later.
Yeah. I mean, but like they given the situation, they wrote him out in a way that felt
makes sense. Yeah.
Like, for example, you mentioning that is the first time I'm hearing about that having happened behind the scenes. Yeah, so I'm like, for all I know, like that could have just been like part of the story.
Right.
Yes. I love that. And also I love good sci-fi because good sci-fi isn't just rockets and advanced space technology, but it's creating these metaphors and metaphorically, studying and examining and exploring the social geopolitical, elements of the world that we live in. And I think like that's what The Expanse did so well, because there were some episodes or some entire seasons where I was more interested in what Avasarala was doing as the president or whatever position she was in versus what was going on the alien planet on the other side of the Supergate.
Yeah.
Like
she's such a good actress too. Oh my God, she's wild. But well, and people give sci-fi a bad rap because it's like, oh, it's nerdy shit and da-da-da. It's like, they actually use like technology and they think they're really thoughtful about like what could the future hold and what could this turn into. I mean, you want to talk about like everything in the original series, The Next Generation, like using iPads for everything. They were doing that. Having automatic doors, they were doing that. The cell phones. I mean, so much technology especially in the original series. Like, gang, we're there. We're doing it, and we're doing it like 400 years in advance.
It's like wild. William Shatner, like the people who are still around who worked on that show or on the show, they're like, I'm living in the future. There's very few things from the show that don't exist right now, and we may get there before like the end of the decade, because like even like the tricorder, we are like at a point where there's devices out there that are about as close to a tricorder as you can imagine, outside of like some of the crazy things that the tricorder could do, where the writers were just like, well, we don't have any money, but we want to do this, so with the tricorder we'll do that. So right.
It's awesome. I love it. But well, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I do really appreciate you coming on and just talking about, you're sharing your story and all the things that you're up to. So just drop your podcast one more time and let people know where they can see you.
Yeah, it's Oh So Curious. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search Oh So Curious. It's like O with an apostrophe. So like 6 o'clock. Like, you can find us on ohsocurious.com. We have stuff like Rolling Underground. We have the Oh So Curious show where we review movies, DCU Daily, where I will defend Aquaman 2 and continue to hope for a better future for DC as a whole, as well as, celebrate what has come before. And we
just got to get their act together.
Marvel. Yeah, I personally look at that and I'm like the last 10 or 15, 12, let's say 13 years since maybe the Dark Knight trilogy ended, I think that's just been the period where they've really stumbled, and a lot of that has to do with like what happened behind the scenes with the people in charge were the wrong people in charge. And I think before that you had DC was always like ahead of the game with Marvel, relatively speaking, it seemed like, but moving forward, I mean, Marvel has like jumped them like 5 times over in the last decade. So
they're losing steam too. People are kind of over Marvel too right now. It makes me sad because I do agree that they oversaturated and they put out way too much shit way too fast. Like we need that buildup. We need that anticipation. People need time. Like, I've talked about this before. My mom really wanted to see the Marvels. And I said, well, you have to see Secret Invasion. You might have to see Loki. You have to see WandaVision. Like you have to see Miss Marvel. I'm like, unfortunately, you can go see it, but you're not going to understand half of the backstory, why they're doing what they're doing, what's going on. So I think Marvel has learned that lesson now. And hopefully they can start bringing some stuff back and some interest back. But I don't know. It makes me. It was a great all the Avengers that time was wonderful.
Yes. a lot of that was like lightning caught in the bottle, and I think they got a little lucky.
Yeah.
I think people give like Kevin Feige and co a lot more credit than for having put that together, because I think what worked for them was they were sort of loosely connecting things, and then things kind of played out well, and then they managed to, you know, give it a really good conclusion. Whereas now I think they overplanned their way into corners, and ultimately I think you're right. Like there's only one Marvel movie coming out in the movie theater. Well, if I'm not counting the Sony ones like Madame Web and Craven aside, just as, or even the new Spider-Man, well, the Spider-Verse film, but like as far as Marvel Cinematic Universe, just Deadpool 3 is coming out this year. Everything else has got pushed to 2025. So that's good. And then on the TV side, there's only going to be like 2 or 3 shows. I think it's only a couple of days away that Echo is going to be releasing on Hulu. And I'm looking forward, because the trailer, I love the trailer. I mean, maybe the show is going to be terrible, but like the trailer looked good. And I hope they were able to, like, you know, put the quality ahead of quantity. And moving forward, DC, of course, is I think on a good track there. Batman, I cannot wait for Batman Part 2, and I'm very curious about Joker Folia, which comes out this year. So there's a lot there coming, and hopefully less is going to be more. I think that's probably what they're aiming for. Or the less. I
mean, I'm going to see it all regardless. So I am rooting for DC to turn it around. Like I said, I loved the Batman. I'm looking for more of that. I'd be happy with more of that. But again, for me, it's like just they've got to just tell a more cohesive story. So we'll see what happens, but I'll see it all regardless. And I'll definitely have you back, because there's just there's so much out there. There's so much that we could be talking about. I'll definitely have you back so we can catch up and go over everything else that's out there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, you should stop by the Oh So Curious show sometime and, you know, give your opinions on. We could do a movie review. We can talk about DC, Marvel. We could talk about like what movie's coming out next week. I haven't seen Ferrari yet. Did you see Ferrari?
Oh, Ferrari. So my only criticism of Ferrari is they focus heavily on his philandering and him as a person, rather than him as an innovator and like what made him so incredible and what made him stand apart from everybody else, what made him revolutionize the industry. They really don't touch on that a whole lot, which was disappointing. Penelope Cruz is unbelievable in it. But if you're a guy who likes race cars and race movies, I would definitely say this is for you. I did enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But again, it just kind of fell short in certain parts. But so what's out right now? The Color Purple, excellent. It is a true musical, though, I will say. So if you're going there thinking you're going to get the same Color Purple that you're used to, you know, the Whoopi Goldberg version or the TV version, it is a true musical. So if you're a fan of musicals, you'll love it, I feel. Poor Things, which I said is wild. It's really good. The Boys in the Boat, really well done. Wonka gang, way too long and way too much like adult subject matter for it to be marketed to little kids, in my opinion. I had no problem with Timothée Chalamet or the music or anything like that, but it was pretty heavy as far as a kids film, quote unquote kids film, is concerned. But if you guys do go see Aquaman, I recommend go see it in 3D, because like I said, I was in the theater and I was like, oh shit, this actually would probably work really well in 3D. So I will say that much, as much as I don't want to promote that movie. But the
only thing I will say, like, there's a slight warning if you go watch, whether you want to watch the first Aquaman, which I don't think is in theaters, even if you do a double feature, but like James Wan has this tendency to, I think he does it at one point in Aquaman 2, where the camera goes in this like big circular motion around the characters. And if you have vertigo or anything like that you sort of struggle with,
I do have motion sickness, and that's where the 3D fucks me.
Just like look away or take your glasses off, because there's a few shots like that where you're just even like, you know, like
that's a good warning.
So
because I tried to watch that movie Hardcore Henry. Hardcore Henry.
Yep, that's the one.
I think I made it 30 minutes, and I had to leave.
That movie's too intense. You know, that movie was made only for video game players.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know what video game players don't do? They don't go watch movies. So that's why that movie bombed, because like they made it for the one audience that does not actually watch movies.
Well, because it started off as a YouTube thing, right?
And
then it was all crowdfunded and they
it was
film.
It was just like
wild. It's a wild experience, but just not for people like me.
Yeah. I wish they had more of a story behind it, because they made it such a pure POV everything the whole time that it did not have the appeal for the average audience that it needed. Like, it's like Barbie, right? Like, you could have made a Barbie movie that only appealed to like little girls and everything, but they made a Barbie movie that worked for everybody and became the biggest movie of the year. I think that's kind of like, maybe if you were to walk away with one lesson from last year's, even in Indiana Jones and all the movies that flopped, all of those movies had, I think one common thread was they were made for very niche audiences going too hard at certain in very specific creative directions. Whereas like a movie like Barbie played to everybody on a fundamental level, because no matter who you were, you would get something out of it. And I know there's people out there who probably hated Barbie, but like, it's
but those are conservative racists, so we don't care about that. That's fine.
I'm like, but it's subjective still. But like, I think like that was one movie which like you can enjoy it like with no matter what you're in for, whether you like the comedy, the drama, the poignant nature of it. I love the dance sequences, like I'm just in this, like every time I'm still in my mind like once a day practicing the moves from that film. So that's I just can't get enough of that film. Like it's awesome. So watchable. Like my biggest metric.
It was really enjoyable.
Like as far as movies go, like if there's one metric that I value more than anything else, I mean, like granted the quality, I judge them based on 100 different things. Like you said, writing and editing being two of them. Watchability. I think if you can make a movie that's very watchable, then that like automatically like, because it encompasses a lot of what makes a good movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what's gonna work. Like the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie is so freaking watchable. It's one of the best Marvel movies ever made.
So Guardians of the Galaxy is the reason I am Elizabeth Marvel. Like I had been toying with the idea of changing the last name. I left that movie and immediately went home and changed that to my last name for all of my socials, because that was the movie that solidified. I fucking love Marvel. I am about Marvel forever. I think I saw the first one 3 times. I saw the second one 2 or 3 times. And then I saw all 3 in a triple feature when the third one came out. We were in the movie theater until 2 a.m. But I mean, I've seen Black Panther 6 times. The first one I saw Infinity War 8 times. I saw Endgame 10 times.
10 times.
10 times. And they got, I mean, listen.
I think I've seen it 10 times, but not in the movie.
Yeah, no, in the theater. I have seen it 10 times. It was, and I still miss it actually. I'm still like, are they ever gonna re-release it on the big screen?
It's such a high. Because it's a community experience. You go watch it with other people and you get the gas of like, and then and the touring. I think that's what you're going to watch that movie in a theater for.
Well, for example, I was just watching, like audience reactions to like the last Spider-Man when Andrew was revealed and then Toby was revealed, and then all the reactions from Endgame when he picks up Thor's hammer, and I'm looking at all these and I'm just like, Aquaman didn't get any of this fucking reaction at any point, you know what I mean? So they're number one for me. They're still number one.
Yeah, it's just not, you don't get the same built-in nostalgia or that sense. I loved Andrew Garfield. I think Andrew Garfield is the best Spider-Man of all time.
I can agree with that. That's fair.
I was kind of mad that they didn't make a third movie. And I mean, even now, I'm like, do you remember there was a whole movement? I don't know if this might still be going, that they want the Sony Spider-Universe's Spider-Man to be like Andrew Garfield, while Tom Holland's over in the MC. Although I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to all get merged into one for the sequels. But
they got to figure it out.
Yeah, there's just so much. I mean, I feel like we can spend an entire episode just talking about this.
So we need to stop there. Also, gang, in the intro before the intro, I did mess up one line. If anybody can tell me what that is, maybe I'll send you something. So this was Try Not to Curse. Thank you, Dan, for sitting down and talking with me again. We're definitely going to have you back because we can just keep going on. But gang, thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you next time.